Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today we're going to be continuing this series on how to solve trigonometric functions using product rule. And in this particular episode or video, we're going to be differentiating cosine x multiplied by secant x. So as you can see from the thumbnail and the title of the video, we're going to be applying product rule to this function. One thing you need to first of all know, the reason why we're doing product rule, the reason why we have to use product rule and apply product rule to this function in order for us to properly differentiate it or derive the function is because we have two sub-functions, cosine x and secant x multiplied by each other. So therefore, when you have two sub-functions multiplied by each other, which is basically then a full function, you're going to apply product rule. So looking at product rule, we have the first sub-function to be f of x and the second sub-function to be g of x. We do the derivative of the first sub-function multiplied by the second sub-function plus the derivative of the second sub-function multiplied by the first sub-function. When we do that, that is how you basically apply the product rule. So now that we have all of that information down, let us start solving the problem. So we have d of dx of cosine x multiplied by secant x. So the first thing you have to do is to do the derivative of the first subfunction, d of dx of cosine x multiplied by secant x plus d of dx of g of x, and in this case, okay, f of x here is cosine x. For those of you who haven't gotten the idea, g of x is secant x. So if you've been watching my video, you will notice that I try to put what f of x stands for and g of x stands for in the previous series. This is actually episode 7 of this series. So there are 6 previous videos on trigonometric functions that we need to apply the product rule to in order for us to differentiate it. So basically, we would write that f of x is this and g of x is this. So that's how we are able to say the derivative of f of x being cosine x, which is what we have here, multiplied by the second subfunction, which is g of x, and g of x is secant x. So then we have plus the derivative of the second subfunction, which would have to be secant x, multiplied by the first subfunction f of x, which is here cosine x. And so this is what we have so far. And we have cosine x. The area of cosine x is basically negative sine x multiplied by secant x, okay, plus the derivative of secant x. So one thing you need to know is, if you're watching these videos for the first time, if you're watching this series for the first time, then you probably do not know, but I have this trig note that I put in every single video that requires the application of, that requires the use of trig. So in this left part of the information, we have the trig expression, okay. In the right part, we have this area, we have the trig identities, okay. And everything that is written in red is just basically trig derivatives. So this is trig derivatives. Trig expressions, basically how we know sine x equals 1 over cosecant x, or we know that cosine x is the same thing as 1 over secant x, or we know that tan x is the same thing as sine x over cosine x, right? That's trig expression. Trig identities is basically one of the identities here is sine square x plus cosine square x equals 1. And then you have the trig derivatives, which is what we have here. So that's how in this part where we had the area of cosine x, we know that to be negative sine x because that is what we have here, right? That's our answer. So now we're left with we've done that. negative sine x multiplied by secant x plus the derivative of secant x. What is the derivative of secant x? The derivative of secant x is secant x multiplied by tan x, right? So now we have plus secant x tan x, right? That's the derivative of secant x. And then we have the cosine x just chilling right here. We're just going to drop it down. And that's going to be secant x multiplied by tan x multiplied by cosine x. So that is what we have on the right side of the positive sign. So you have this. So we're going to rewrite that information on the next page. And we're going to work further. So we have negative sine x secant x plus secant x tan x cosine x, right? So now that we have that, it's important for you to know that the derivative of cosine x multiplied by secant x, we already have the answer. This is actually our answer. But whenever you're working with trig, guess what? This answer is absolutely correct. Whenever you're working with trig, in order for you to have a neater and a more compact answer, you can use the trig expression, the trig identities that we have on the first page here. We can apply it and substitute it where it's needed in order for us to make our answer more compact and have an answer that is more direct and less complicated like this. This is a lot of information. Negative sine x multiplied by secant x plus secant x tan x cosine x. That's a lot. So we're going to start with this. So the first thing you have to know is this. When you have negative sine x secant x plus secant x tan x cosine x, this can also be written as this. You can write negative sine x, okay? What do we know secant x to be? We know secant x to be, when we look at the trig expression, we know we can call secant x to be 1 over cosine x. So we're going to have this here multiplied by 1 over cosine x, okay? That's good. Plus, so we have secant here again, so we can have this as 1 over cosine x, okay? Right? Then you have tan x. What is tan x? What can we represent tan x as? We can represent tan x here. We can see tan x can be written as 1 over cotangent x or sine x over cosine x. And when you look at our work, we don't have any cotangent information. So we're not going to put a cotangent information because it's just going to make our work more complicated. So instead, we're going to put the sine over cosine information. So sine x over cosine x information. So then we have this cosine x just chilling. We'll bring that down here. So in order for us to make it more compact, we can do some cancellation and factoring of stuff. So you have cosine here, cancel out. So our answer can now be equals to negative sine x over cosine x plus sine x over cosine x. And from our understanding of math, negative sine x over cosine x plus positive sine x over cosine x. Basically, these two will cancel each other out and we're going to have our answer to be 0. This is the same thing as saying negative 1 plus 1 or negative 1 billion plus 1 billion. You're always going to get 0. So we have a negative in front of the first term and a positive in front of the second term, and they both cancel out and we get our answer to be 0. So this is our final answer. So now so you see the importance of working with the different trig expressions that we had in the first part. And again, if you don't have this in your notes, as you go down or as you go through this series with me, know how important it is for you to have these trig notes. Students who have already started watching from episode 1 to 6 already understand that they need to pause the video and write this down. If this is the first video that you're watching on my channel, please pause the video and write this information down. You're going to need it when we do trig functions, derivative of trig functions using quotient rule, chain rule, power rule, all of that stuff. You're going to need this information. So yeah, that is what we've done so far. Now that we've done this, the work is not done. We can now do a shortcut method, which I'm going to teach you in case you have a you have a multiple choice question and you don't have time. So now we were given the function f of x, right, equals cosine of x, secant of x, right? If that's what we're doing, remember what did we say secant x was? We said secant x was the same thing as 1 over cosine x, right? So here, we know that secant x here is equals to 1 over cosine x, right? So this is what we can do. We can do this. We can say cosine x, right? Oh, secant x is the same thing as 1 over cosine x, so multiplied by 1 over cosine x. So we have f of x to be cosine x, so we end up with f of x equals 1. So the derivative of f of x here is the same thing as doing the derivative of 1. And the derivative of 1 in this case is what? That's 0. So when you look at our work, you see that we got 0. We got 0. So rather than this whole process that we did right here and here, we can just have done this short process from here to here and would have gotten the answer. So this brings me to the end of this video. I hope you guys have learned something new. You guys have enjoyed yourself while you spent this little short, less than 20 minutes or 15 minutes with me. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe. If you also, I would advise that you share this with other people in your class so that they can learn as well. And this video is consistent, so there are more videos on this series where you're going to be using trig functions. You could also check my chain rule. I also have videos on trig functions using chain rule and on quotient rule. And if you have any questions, put it in the comment section, or more importantly, go into the description box. Maybe the question could be answered before even asking it. Make sure you take good care of yourself. Look into the description box for my contact information and anything else that you may need. And take good care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.